Welcome to Stoic origin. They didn't see the shift coming, not the moment your eyes stopped chasing validation, not the second your voice went calm instead of pleading. They mistook your silence for weakness, but silence, when guided by discipline, is the loudest declaration of self-respect. Stay with me, because by the end of this you'll understand why the person who ignored your worth is now haunted by it. This story isn't about revenge, it's about realization, about the quiet power that Stoicism teaches when you stop begging to be chosen and start choosing yourself. And here's the tension most people miss. The moment you detach emotionally is the moment the dynamic flips. That's when regret begins, not yours, theirs. Picture this: you gave consistency, you showed up, you kept your word even when it cost you comfort. Meanwhile, they treated your effort like background noise, convenient, replaceable, something they could always come back to. And you felt it, that low-grade anxiety, that knot in your chest when texts went unanswered, but you told yourself to be patient, to be understanding, to be loyal. Stoicism would call that misplaced attachment. And attachment, when it isn't mutual, becomes self-betrayal. Here's the first uncomfortable truth: people rarely value what is always available. Marcus Aurelius warned about this centuries ago. When you give others control over your emotional state, you hand them power without terms, and power, unchecked, breeds entitlement. They started believing your presence was guaranteed, your forgiveness automatic, your loyalty unconditional. That belief shaped their behavior: cold replies, delayed affection, subtle disrespect, each moment small, together devastating. But something changed, not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. You stopped explaining yourself. You stopped overperforming just to be noticed. You stopped chasing clarity from someone committed to confusion. And here's where Stoicism steps in. You focused on what you could control: your reactions, your standards, your self-respect. You didn't announce it, you embodied it. That's when the tension snapped, because absence hits differently when it's intentional. Your silence no longer begged for attention. It removed access, and suddenly the person who ignored your worth started feeling the weight of it. They checked their phone more. They replayed conversations. They noticed the empty space you once filled without complaint. Regret doesn't arrive with apologies at first. It arrives as discomfort, as confusion, as the unsettling realization that control has slipped. Understand this: Stoicism doesn't teach you to withdraw to punish. It teaches you to withdraw to protect, to stop pouring energy into cups with holes. You didn't become cold, you became clear, and clarity is terrifying to someone who benefited from your chaos. They didn't lose you because you stopped caring. They lost you because you started caring about yourself. And let's be real for a second. This part hurts. Because while they were taking you for granted, you were fighting an internal war: ego versus principle, fear of loss versus fear of self-abandonment. Stoicism doesn't numb that pain, it sharpens it so you can see clearly. It teaches that suffering isn't caused by what happens, but by the story you keep telling yourself about what happens. Once you rewrote that story, everything shifted. You realized you didn't need to prove your value. Value doesn't negotiate. It stands. You stopped reacting to breadcrumbs. You stopped reading into mixed signals. You stopped accepting half-effort as love. That's not bitterness, that's boundaries. And boundaries change the game fast. People sense when access is no longer automatic, when your energy isn't cheap, when your presence has weight. That's when respect starts replacing indifference. But respect earned too late always turns into regret. Once that realization hits them, it echoes louder than any argument you ever tried to win. This silence redraws the map of power, but this is only the beginning. Because the regret they feel isn't about missing you, it's about facing themselves without your emotional labor cushioning the fall. And in the next part, we're going to break down the exact Stoic principle that makes this shift permanent, and why once you step into it, you never go back. Here's where it gets uncomfortable, because regret doesn't start when they miss you. It starts when they realize you're no longer emotionally available to be controlled. That's the part no one warns you about. Stay locked in, because what I'm about to explain is the exact moment the power dynamic collapses. Stoicism calls this the shift from external validation to internal authority. When you stop needing their approval to feel whole, You took something from them they didn't even know they were using. Influence. You weren't loud about it. You didn't make threats. You simply detached. And detachment, when rooted in self-mastery, is magnetic. Think about it. Before, your reactions were predictable. If they pulled away, you leaned in. If they went cold, you tried harder. That predictability gave them comfort. Control thrives on patterns. Stoicism teaches you to break patterns by mastering your impulses. The moment you stopped reacting on instinct and started responding with intention, the game changed. They noticed, not consciously at first, but something felt off. You weren't chasing clarity. You weren't asking where you stood. You weren't bending yourself into shapes just to fit their mood. And here's the twist. People often confuse emotional availability with weakness. When you removed easy access to your emotions, they finally had to confront your value without the distraction of your effort. Epictetus said something most people skip over. If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. Translation? Let them misunderstand your silence. Let them assume you don't care, because the truth is, you're no longer performing for their perception. You're grounded in your own principles. That's not indifference, that's discipline. Now watch how regret evolves. At first, they test you, a random message, a half-hearted check-in, something casual, something safe, not because they miss you, but because they want to see if the door is still unlocked. And when you don't rush to answer, the anxiety sets in, not yours, theirs. Because uncertainty is unbearable for someone who relied on your consistency. Here's the psychological shift. Your absence forces self-reflection. Without your reassurance, they're left alone with their own behavior, the way they delayed replies, the way they assumed you'd wait, the way they took loyalty as a given. Stoicism teaches that people suffer more in imagination than in reality. Regret lives in that imagination, in the what-ifs, in the missed chances, in the realization that respect cannot be retroactively applied. And let's be clear, you didn't ghost. You didn't play games. You simply stopped overgiving. You stopped explaining your worth to someone who benefited from undervaluing it. That restraint is pure Stoic strength. Strength is not dominance, it's self-control. And self-control, unself-control, unsettles people who thrived on your emotional availability. Now comes the part most people don't expect. The regret intensifies when they see you thriving without needing to broadcast it. You're calmer, more focused, less reactive. You're not trying to prove anything, and that's what makes it undeniable. You didn't win by taking something from them. You won by reclaiming yourself. But here's the cliffhanger. Regret doesn't automatically lead to accountability. Sometimes it leads to manipulation, guilt trips, nostalgia, rewriting history. And if you're not grounded in Stoic principles, it's easy to slip back into old patterns. In the next part, we're going to expose the most common trap people fall into when the person who ignored their worth suddenly comes back, and how Stoicism gives you a bulletproof framework to never repeat the cycle. This is where most people lose the battle they already won, because when someone who ignored your worth feels regret, they rarely come back healed. They come back hungry for the comfort they lost. And if you're not careful, you'll mistake their interest for change. Stay with me, because this part decides whether you repeat the cycle or end it for good. Stoicism warns against confusing emotion with evidence. Just because someone feels regret doesn't mean they've developed character. Regret can exist without responsibility. And responsibility is the only currency that buys trust. When they reach out again, it often sounds softer, familiar, almost sincere. They might say they've been thinking about you, that they didn't realize what they had, that they missed the connection. But notice what's missing: ownership. Specific accountability, changed behavior. Here's the internal tension. Part of you wants closure, part of you wants validation. Stoicism doesn't shame that feeling, it contextualizes it. Epictetus would say this urge comes from placing your peace in someone else's hands again. And the moment you do that, you give up the freedom you fought to regain. Watch their actions, not their words. Do they respect your boundaries without negotiation? Do they show consistency without being prompted? Or do they only lean in when they feel you pulling away? This is the litmus test. Stoic discipline teaches you to observe without attachment, to gather data without emotional investment, That's how you stay clear-headed when old patterns try to re-enter your life wearing a new mask. Here's something people don't talk about. Your growth threatens them. Not because you're better, but because you're no longer manageable. You're no longer shaped by their moods that can trigger insecurity. And insecurity often disguises itself as renewed affection. But affection without respect is just another form of control. The real power move isn't rejection, it's neutrality. You're not angry, you're not chasing, you're not proving anything. You're simply unavailable for dynamics that require you to shrink. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the best revenge is to not be like the one who wronged you. And that doesn't mean staying. It means refusing to become reactive, bitter, or emotionally impulsive. Now let's flip the lens. The regret they feel deepens when they realize you're no longer easily moved. Their words don't spike your emotions. Their presence doesn't destabilize your peace. That's when they understand the cost of ignoring your worth. Not because you left, but because you evolved. And evolution is irreversible. This is also where many people feel guilt. You might think you're being cold, that you're punishing them by not engaging the same way. Stoicism clears this confusion fast. You are not responsible for managing someone else's discomfort. You are responsible for protecting your character. And character demands consistency with your values, not accessibility to everyone who desires you. But here's the deeper twist. Sometimes the regret isn't loud, it's silent. They watch from a distance. They notice you're no longer orbiting them, that you've reclaimed your time, your focus, your self-respect, and that quiet observation hurts more than confrontation ever could, because it forces them to face the truth without distraction. And now comes the most important realization. You didn't lose anything by stepping back. You gained clarity, and clarity exposes incompatibility. In the next part, we're going to break down why Stoicism teaches that walking away from what disrespects you is not loss, but alignment, and why alignment is the foundation of unshakable confidence. Here's the moment everything clicks. The moment you realize walking away wasn't abandonment, it was alignment. And once alignment happens, regret on the other side becomes inevitable. Stay focused, because this is where Stoicism turns emotional pain into unbreakable confidence. Most people think confidence comes from being chosen. Stoicism teaches the opposite. Confidence comes from choosing yourself without apology. When you stepped away from what consistently disrespected you, you didn't lose connection. You removed friction between who you are and how you live. That's alignment. And alignment is rare. That's why it's powerful. Let's be honest. While you were trying to make it work, you felt off. Not because you weren't enough, but because the situation required you to compromise your values. You ignored red flags. You justified mixed signals. You told yourself patience was virtue. Stoicism draws a hard line here. Endurance is noble only when it serves virtue. Endurance for the sake of attachment is self-neglect. Once you aligned your actions with your principles, something shifted internally. You stopped seeking reassurance. You stopped needing closure. You stopped replaying conversations. That's when peace arrived. Not excitement, not validation, peace. And peace is the most destabilizing thing to someone who relied on your emotional chaos to feel secure. Now watch what happens to them. Their regret deepens, not because you're gone, but because you're unreachable in the old way. They can't trigger the same reactions. They can't pull you back with familiarity. The version of you they knew no longer exists. And that realization creates a specific kind of discomfort. The kind that forces self-evaluation. Stoicism teaches that we suffer not from events, but from judgments. They judged you as permanent, as forgiving, as endlessly available. Your alignment shattered that judgment. And when a false belief collapses, regret fills the gap. Often internal, often unresolved. Here's a key insight. You didn't become emotionally distant. You became emotionally selective. There's a difference. Emotional distance is avoidance. Emotional selectivity is wisdom. You learned that access to you is earned through respect, not history. Through consistency, not promises. Through action, not intention. This is where unshakable confidence forms. Confidence isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't argue. It simply refuses to negotiate self-respect. You no longer need to explain why you deserve better. You live it. And living it is what makes others reflect on what they lost. But here's the internal test. Sometimes doubt creeps in. You wonder if you were too harsh, too quick to detach. Stoicism answers this cleanly. If walking away restored your peace, it wasn't a mistake. Peace is not a side effect. It's a signal that you're finally in alignment with your nature. Meanwhile, regret on the other side matures. It turns from confusion into clarity. They see patterns, they recognize behavior, they realize you weren't difficult, you were discerning. And discerning people are dangerous to entitlement because they don't stay where they're undervalued. This is why Stoicism emphasizes self-governance. When you govern yourself, no one else can misuse you. You don't need to control outcomes. You control your responses, your standards, your presence. And presence, when it's no longer guaranteed, becomes unforgettable. Now here's the cliffhanger. Alignment doesn't just change how others see you. It changes who you attract next. And in the final part, we're going to uncover how Stoicism ensures that once you've been ignored and walked away with dignity, you never end up in the same dynamic again, and why the regret they feel becomes a permanent reminder of the version of you they'll never access again. This is where the story closes. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with something far more powerful: finality. Because once Stoicism reshapes you, you don't just walk away from disrespect. You become someone disrespect can no longer reach. Stay with me, because this is the moment everything locks into place. After alignment comes attraction, not the shallow kind, the real kind. When you govern yourself, you stop attracting people who test your worth and start attracting people who recognize it without explanation. Stoicism teaches that like seeks like, chaos attracts chaos. Discipline attracts discipline. When you changed internally, your external world had no choice but to respond. Now look back at the one who ignored your worth. Their regret isn't about losing access to you. It's about losing access to the version of themselves they could have been if they had shown up correctly. You became a mirror they weren't ready to look into, and mirrors don't chase, they reflect. This is the final Stoic truth most people never reach. You don't need closure from someone who disrespected you. Closure is an internal act. It happens when your values and actions align so fully that the past no longer has leverage over your emotions. You don't replay conversations. You don't imagine alternate endings. You don't wait for apologies. You've already moved on internally first, externally second. Their regret becomes permanent because it has no outlet. You're not there to absorb it. You're not there to soothe it. You're not there to explain yourself. And that's not cruelty. That's consequence. Stoicism never asks you to be harsh. It asks you to be just. And justice begins with self-respect. You've probably noticed something else by now. You're harder to manipulate, harder to rush, harder to shake. That's not emotional numbness. That's emotional sovereignty. You feel deeply but selectively. You invest intentionally. And you walk away decisively when values are compromised. That's mastery. And here's the quiet victory. You don't need them to regret it for you to win. Their regret is just evidence that your decision was correct, proof that your worth was real all along, even when it was ignored, especially when it was ignored. Stoicism teaches that the goal of life isn't to be admired, chosen, or missed. It's to live in accordance with reason and virtue. When you did that, you didn't just end a chapter, you elevated your standard. And standards don't look back, they set the bar. So if you're watching this and you've ever been taken for granted, overlooked, or treated like an option, remember this. The moment you stop negotiating your worth is the moment regret begins on the other side. Quiet, heavy, unavoidable. If this message hit home, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video so it reaches someone who needs clarity. Share it with someone who's still questioning their worth. And subscribe to Stoic Origin for more truths that sharpen your mindset and protect your peace. You didn't lose anything by walking away. You gained yourself.